Um, okay.
Go ahead.
So, um, so is it, would you say it's appropriate for me to discuss Buddhist embryology theory, or is that, or should I just talk about practice and
Well, if you understand the reason for practice, and by the way, welcome. This is our first time together, and people might want watch this video and be curious. So yes, um, having a background and time in India, you already have been indoctrinated into the same things that um, the Buddha had to deal with people. And so the right way to practice, or actually the right way to live our lives, is uh, kind of easy to figure out. But because of the habit patterns and the old ways that we have been taught, those interfere with and prevent us from being able to see what we actually need to do right now. Okay. That in fact, whatever happens to someone who is dead doesn't have any effect upon you, whatever you believe. You can believe that he died and he'll never wake up. You can believe that he has already waken up. He's already in heaven. You can believe any of those things. You can believe that he's going to hell after he's a donkey. It doesn't matter what happens. The question is how can you manage your own mind knowing that you don't know? That this thirst for knowledge is built into human society in general, but it's
mm,
especially bad for Westerners to have to know everything.
right,
Having to know everything is what causes people within computer science to get a PhD. It causes Buddhists to become Buddhist scholars. It causes some Brahmins to be Brahmin scholars, and they even memorize the Rig Vedas and the Brahmashads. And then the Muslims will memorize the Quran, all after a thirst for knowledge, right?
right. Some
But the question is this the right knowledge, or is there a certain kind of knowledge that will be enough? And when we have just enough knowledge, then we don't need to go in the pursuit of more knowledge and more knowledge and more knowledge, that we've got enough. When will that ever happen? Because for some people, most people, it never does, and they're still thirsty for knowledge. They're still wanting things, even at the point of death. They're still wanting something. And so they can't even stop long enough to enjoy their own death because they want something. They want to know something. Okay. So the question is, how can we train the mind to become satisfied with how things are right now, even though we don't know what we want to know? And it doesn't matter who tells you anything, that does not prove that it's true. That you're enough of a scientist to know that there is a physical reality and that we can prove things because it can be demonstrated over and over and over again.
right.
An example of that is Einstein's general theory of relativity and the fact that space bends with gravity. And they worked really hard to get a very, very first photograph of an eclipse so that they could show that the stars are out of alignment because the light had to be bending around the sun
Yeah,
and that they can only see that. Well, guess what? Every astronomer and every physics professor that I know of still looks for eclipses so that they can take their photographic equipment out there and show that again over and over again, and it happens every time. There's been hundreds, maybe even thousands of photos taken that prove that gravitational big objects bend the space, which show the alignment is not in a straight line. That in fact the star is behind the sun and it's over here, but by the line of sight, it's actually out there. But when the sun moves away, the star moves back where it used to be. All right. We've proven that. How many thousands of times that's been proven and now is accepted as scientific fact because it had to be proven over and over and over and over again. And yet all we have for rebirth and reincarnation is stories, and we've got no physical evidence anywhere.
Are you familiar with the Ian Stevenson database? Do you consider it remotely credible?
I don't know what you're talking about. No, you're probably talking about a database of stories.
Well, stories that have, to some extent, been verified, but of course there are
To some
people.
extent,
To
okay,
some
let's
extent,
go
yeah.
back from to some extent, which is now hope, into going back to the bending of light with the eclipse, where that's over and over and over and
Yeah.
over and over and over again. That's the whole point now, is that is verifiable evidence. The other is all based in hope. And in fact, everyone, even the people who were building that database, live their life as if it doesn't matter, except that it gives them mental pain because they want to know.
Mhm.
Okay. And they still don't know. All right. Now, here's another example of that. On the History Channel in the United States, when cable came into use many years ago, there was an ongoing program on the History Channel where they would go with their scientific equipment. I mean, Geiger counters and all kinds of radiation and electromagnetic and all kinds of stuff, including very, very high speed cameras and all kinds of stuff. And they would go to every haunted house that had ever been called haunted. And they would do a documentary on that haunted house about how spooky it was. They would play spooky music, and the end of every one of these, they would then admit that we didn't find any evidence at all.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the whole problem. There is no evidence of ghosts, those kind of ghosts, but there is clear evidence of Piti, or
Uh,
Piti, the
of,
hungry ghost in the hell realms and the woeful states.
there's clear evidence of those?
Well, here's the Piti: is any time that you are hungry and thirsty after something that you can't get, you have
Yeah.
become a hungry ghost.
Fair enough. Yeah. That's a good way to see it. Yeah. That's fair.
Okay. So this is how we begin to understand the teachings of the Buddha is that we've got work to do right now to clean out our minds rather than worrying about stuff that have no answers to them.
Right.
Because there will be no end to your suffering, because there will be no end to the questions. What we need to learn is how to become satisfied, even though we don't know what we want to know. So the
Um,
way that you can do that is for anyone who is in your life is dead, you can say goodbye to them and let them go. This is what we call in Buddhism a relinquishment or turning loose. They call it letting go, but it's not just letting go, because we're actually clinging strongly to it. So letting go for us normally is that's the kind of letting go. All right.
yeah.
There's an easy letting go, and that's this, but we don't do it that way. We don't just let go. It's like we have to struggle with having it taken away from us.
Mm.
But that's what real clinging is. Real clinging is the fact that we lose anything. Anything that we get, we're going to lose. And anything that's dear to us is going to cause us grief.
Yes.
If we know that, then we can plan in advance so that we know how we are dear to things, knowing that if we are dear to it, it will cause us grief. Now, are we willing to go through that grief, or are we willing to kind of let go in advance so that we don't have to grieve so much when we lose it? An example of that would be somebody who's got a laptop and they need it for their work, but they know what they're doing. They know that laptops are temporary, so they're going to have a whole nother laptop as backup, so that when that laptop dies, they don't go through a grief process. They've got something ready to go.
Right.
Okay, so that would be wisdom and planning, is to have an extra copy of something that's temporary.
Mm-hmm.
So when the gallon of milk is getting low, it's better to go buy some milk if you're going to the grocery store, rather than going ahead and running out and then feeling a loss of milk. I don't have milk. Oh, poor me. I'm grieving over loss of milk, loss of laptop, loss of a loved one. The thing of it is that that's the main teaching of Buddhism, is that anicca vata sankhara, everything that is in existence, that is put together, compounded, like water. Water is temporary. Though some of the water molecules may or may not have been lasting millions of years, there's no evidence to know how long a water molecule has been a water molecule. It could have been produced in a fire. It could have been produced in the body. In fact, that's something a lot of people don't know about, and that is the urine that you produce is not equal to the amount of water that you drink. That the body actually produces water, because we eat the hydrocarbons, we break the hydrocarbons down with oxygen, by breathing, give the oxygen to the carbon, creating carbon dioxide. We breathe that out, and the hydrogen is combined with the water, and that is flushed out of the body with urine. If we know that, then we recognize, hey, a lot of the water that we just pissed out right now is brand new water. It wasn't water. It was hamburger last week.
Well, it's interesting that they used the word hamburger, because that's another question that I wanted to ask you about, Buddhist practice in general. So there is a certain teacher who is, to my mind, very, very wise in general, very knowledgeable, who presents the following argument. He says that in Buddhism, in order for you to have killed something, you have to have used a weapon. You have had to have the intention to kill something. You use a weapon. The being dies. Then you've killed the being. And then you point to a plate of meat, or to a slab of meat in the store, and say, "Did I kill that slab of meat?" No. So I'm just eating it. I'm not responsible in any way for how that meat got there. Do you agree with?
Well, no, I do not agree with any of that, other
Yes.
than to say that that is typical ordinary mind state. Ordinary people live their ordinary lives with a whole collection of ordinary rules that they're trying to justify their existence against. But let me put it another way. And that is that if the mind is noble, if you are in a state of satisfaction, then you're unlikely, with that mind that's in a state of satisfaction, you don't want anything, then the likelihood of you going and killing a big animal or killing a human being is quite remote, because you don't want anything from them. Almost always killing requires the desire for it to be dead. And that's just an ordinary way of looking at it. But the noble way of looking at it is that I don't want anything, so I'm not going to harm anyone. If I don't want anything, I'm not going to steal anything. If I don't want anything, then I'm not going to lie to try to get it.
What about the need for food? So are you a vegetarian, for instance?
Well, in the West, they have a very, very strong rule And that strong rule is enforced and has many, many laws associated with it that has to do with you don't work, you don't eat.
Mhm.
And yet I know millions and millions of people who don't work and they do eat. An example of that would be children, retired people,
Yeah.
monks and nuns in various orders and all the various religions. Another group of people who don't work are politicians. And we've got tens of thousands of those in the United States, and none of them work. They just go around lying all the time and they eat just fine. So that old quality of you don't work, you don't eat is not the issue. The question is, how do you eat? And the right answer to that is eat mindfully, eat wisely, because it's necessary. But if you don't eat, you can still last a month or so. If you don't drink water, you can probably last 3, 4, 5 days. But you do have a death sentence. 2 minutes from now, you're going to die. And the only way that you can prevent yourself from dying within the next 2 minutes is by taking the next breath. So when you're asking about food, I say food's not really important. You can go a long time without food, but you can't go without breathing. So let's do something much more immediate and start talking about breath, which is pranayama or anapana or chi or life force. All of that kind of stuff is much more useful for us to talk about than food.
Speaking of Ānāpāna then, so do you would you agree with me that Ānāpānasati is I would say the primary form of meditation that the Buddha taught, or it is the most useful for a beginner at least to.
I would go this far to say it this way, and that is that first off, the Buddha himself said that Ānāpānasati is fit for everyone, and any and everyone who practices will get great benefit, great fruit.
Mhm.
We can also see that there are no other meditations taught anywhere in any of the suttas other than Ānāpānasati. Though there are a whole lot of people who are very deeply interested in the Satipatthana Sutta, it states specifically in the Ānāpānasati Sutta that Ānāpānasati is the practice for the fulfillment of the Satipatthana, the 4 foundations of mindfulness. There's more to it than that, and that is that the Ānāpānasati Sutta fits directly with the sutta that precedes that, number 117, the Great 40, that talks about how to apply the Eightfold Noble Path. So the Eightfold Noble Path is what the Buddha teaches, and the Ānāpānasati is the application of that. And
How do you
that's what
feel?
he taught. And so metta meditations, kasina kasina meditations, um, charnel ground meditations, all of those kind of things have their value, but they are not liberating.
Mhm.
Even metta practice with the four Brahma Viharas are not liberating. But what is liberating is the mind state that we can get in so that we can see how things really are.
Mhm.
And this is the practice of Ānāpānasati. Next point about that, and that is that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa has said that the Buddha only taught one kind of meditation, and that was Ānāpānasati, and caused a great deal of kerfuffle in Thailand, causing a great deal of literature search. Because when Bhikkhu Buddhadasa said something, he had enemies, and boy, would they try to attack him. And they could not prove him wrong when he said that Ānāpānasati is the only practice that the Buddha taught.
There are suttas considerably numerous, as I recall, that talk about sending. I don't know whether the word is metta or whether it's loving kindness or equanimity, something like that, in various directions. Or and
Okay. All right. Now we're getting confused about language and words. One thing that we can understand is that metta practice was a Brahman practice, and it was practiced in India before the time of the Buddha. And that there's suttas about that the monks, the bhikkhus, encountered this group of people who were doing the metta practice, and they told them what they were doing, and then the monks came back to the Buddha to talk about it. So we know those kind of things exist. And we also know that if you are practicing metta, you are actually having wholesome thoughts for someone. That means that you're practicing wholesome thought. So metta is only an example of a wholesome thought. What the Buddha did teach was wholesome and unwholesome thought, and to remove unwholesome thoughts and to put wholesome thoughts in the mind. But metta is not the only wholesome thought. And in fact, a whole lot of times people are practicing metta and their thoughts are not wholesome. And a clear example of that is, oh, let all beings be happy. May all beings be free from suffering. Guess what? That is a hope. A much better way that's actually wholesome is, wow, I wish everybody felt as good as I do right now. Okay, so may all beings be happy means may all, including me, because I'm not happy right now. So that kind of practice of metta is not wholesome.
Right.
So we need to recognize then that what the Buddha teaches is wholesome.
Right.
And that he teaches Ānāpānasati to take the mind into that wholesome state. And when the mind is confused, it's not wholesome. When the mind wants something, it's not wholesome. When the mind is agitated and worried, it's not wholesome. When the mind is dull, or it doesn't care, or is feeling defeated, or is angry about something, then the mind is really not good for work. It's not wholesome. And all of those that I just mentioned, the 5 hindrances, each one of them is a form of dissatisfaction. So when we get the mind out of the state of dissatisfaction and into the state of wholesomeness, this is the practice of Ānāpānasati.
And how do you deal with hindrances in the practice?
By throwing them out of the mind as soon as they're seen, as soon as you recognize it, as soon as you wake up, take a look, recognize that this thought right now is a hindrance. Only right now is this thought a hindrance. If it is, throw it out. You were beginning to ask a question about how do I throw out the hindrances for all time? The answer to that is you've got to develop the skill, and the only way to develop that skill is to throw out the hindrances in the mind right now.
Temporarily, right.
And if you can throw it out right now and throw it out right now and throw it out right now, and throw it out right now you're on a roll and you're heading towards having it completely gone. But if you worry about how can I get rid of them altogether, that actually is a hindrance right there.
Yes. So, so it sounds to me like what you're saying is you use concentration to remove hindrance.
No. Do not use concentration.
What then?
Concentration keeps people deep. And we're looking for flying. We're not looking for digging a grave and finding out old dead stuff. That's what concentration is about. No, we're looking at ways of freeing the mind. Most times when people are concentrating, almost always they're concentrating on the dukkha. Look at the dukkha, see the dukkha, connect this dukkha with that dukkha, go follow that dukkha down a rat hole. That's what people practice in concentration meditation.
Well, isn't the breath kind of neutral phenomenon? There's no craving attached to the breath, I would assume, which is.
I tell you what, if I was sitting beside you, I'd already be having one arm around your throat, tightening as hard as I can while I've got both your mouth and your nose closed to see whether or not neutral breath is neutral or not.
Under ordinary circumstances, for when
When
we're
you
breathing
don't have
normally.
it, you need it.
Yeah.
That's what, okay, so the ordinary circumstance is that you need it, but there it is.
Right.
That does not make it neutral. It makes it quite wonderful that you need it badly to live, and there it is. So you can be grateful, thankful. It's not ordinary. It's not neutral. You can't live without it. And if you have any desire to live, then breathing is not neutral.
So, so I would like to ask you what the first jhana feels like, and
Ānāpānasati is the practice for that.
yes,
Okay,
but
and the
so
number one thing to have any, let us say, to get the mind fit for work, to get the mind up to scratch,
yeah,
we have to have the hindrances removed in this moment. That's
yeah,
the point. That's why we practice the way that we do. Is number one, sati, to remember, to look at what's going on, and then make a correction, make a course correction. And that making a course correction is removing the unwholesome thoughts and putting in wholesome thoughts. Later, the course correction will mean removing wholesome thoughts and putting even more wholesome thoughts in place.
mhm,
But in the beginning, is the course correction is remove unwholesome thoughts and put wholesome thoughts in the mind, and then be satisfied with our new course correction. And then we take another look and we see how it is. And if there's any new hindrances, any new unwholesome thoughts, we remove those and do another course correction. So the teaching of the Buddha is all about change. But in order to be able to change, we have to see how things actually really are. And the way things actually really are is enough for us to be able to make the changes that are necessary. But most of what religion is about magical thinking.
what
Christianity is absolutely full of magical thinking, and everybody who's not a Christian can see all the magical thinking. But the Christians who can't see the magical thinking in Christianity can see all the magical thinking in Hindu. But the Hindus can't see it as magical thinking because they think it's real, but they have no evidence. Okay, so you being a physicist, you being a computer scientist, let's work with what's real, what's physical, what's rupa. Okay, that's where we're going to go with that. And breathing is real. Breathing is rupa. Chemicals are real. There's chemicals all over the body. You're just nothing but a chemical mess inside. Okay, the carbon comes in the form of food and carbohydrates, and they're broken down with the breathing. And all of that stuff is happening times a bazillion. There is so much happening within the human body that we don't have any way of keeping track of what all that's happening. But it's a
so
good idea to start paying attention to what's happening that we can see.
so how do you recognize when you are in a jhana, or what does a jhana feel like? I mean,
Well,
are
the better question is how to practice Ānāpānasati and what are the skills that need to be developed within Ānāpānasati. Because if we can develop the skills that are stated in Ānāpānasati, that means that we have the constituent components that now can all be fit together and to be called the first jhana. This is why it's called samadhi. But unfortunately, samadhi has been translated into English incorrectly as concentration, where in fact samadhi is in many cases exactly opposite to concentration. I'll give you an example. Have you ever heard of frozen concentrated orange juice? It was very popular 50 years ago in the United States, where they would take all the water out of the orange juice for transportation purposes, add sugar to it, freeze it, and sell it. All right. But
thankfully I haven't.
no one drinks
Yeah,
frozen concentrated orange juice.
can imagine.
No, what do? We make it back samadhi. We add water. We add ice. It's already got the sugar in it, and so we have to make it back whole again. So samadhi means whole, and concentration often means getting down to the basics and throwing everything else out. And we're not practicing concentration. We're practicing gathering together. So first jhana has no concentration at all. It does have gathering together the factors of the first jhana. And what are now the factors of the first jhana? One is applied and sustained thought, which means that I'm applying the mind to the kind of thinking that I'm doing so that there are no hindrances. And then I sustain that so that the thoughts that I'm having in first jhana are all wholesome thoughts. None of them are unwholesome, hindering thoughts. So we apply the mind to the wholesome and we remain wholesome. As we're applying the mind to the wholesome, we're actually working with Ānāpānasati to know the body and to relax the body. Step 4 of Ānāpānasati is relaxing of the body, which is actually a jhana factor. Okay, the next one is by having wholesome. Just hang on. You asked a question. Let me answer it.
Okay.
On a take about 4 days to answer this question. Okay, so hang in there and listen. So with the changing of the mind from unwholesome to wholesome in the Ānāpānasati Sutta, they reference that as gladdening the mind or brightening the mind. With the mind being brightened over and over again, we continue to sustain having wholesome, bright thoughts. We begin to talk ourselves into feeling good. That good feeling then is the sukha. We begin to feel good as opposed to feel dissatisfied. So by throwing the hindering thoughts out of the mind and having satisfying, wholesome thoughts, we begin to feel satisfied and we begin to feel wholesome. When we continue to do this over a long period of time, we begin to get the attitude, hey, I can do this. And that's when the Piti arises. So that the Piti actually is a skill to be developed with confidence, just like sukha is developed with wholesome thoughts. And so you now have Piti Sukha, applied, sustained thoughts in the absence of hindrances. Those are the 5 factors that are constituent together to form the first jhana. So the first jhana literally means that the mind is fit for work. It's fit for work because it's free from the hindrances. It's fit for work because it's got the ability to see what is there in reality rather than seeing things in reality through the smoke screen of ignorance of the hindrances. So once we get the mind fit for work, we can now put it into, I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries.
Okay, so this is the first jhana. The first jhana is these 5 constituent components, none of which have anything to do with concentration. But when we put these factors together, that's the formation of the first jhana, which is the platform for which we're going to operate. Why? Because now everything that we can see and everything that we can note is going to be wholesome. If it is not wholesome, we're not in first jhana. So by definition, everything that we're looking at in first jhana is real and it is wholesome, which means it is not subject to mental crap being added to it. It's real. So now we're going to use that for an investigation. So this is the practice of Ānāpānasati, is to get the mind into first jhana. This is what it's all about, to get the body relaxed, to get the feelings correct, to get the mind thinking correctly. And when we have the body, the feelings, and the mind working correctly, now we can observe phenomena directly, the arising and the passing away of everything that's wholesome.
So I have had times at which it has seemed to me like there's piti all over the body and it seems to explode in waves.
Right, but this is ordinary. People have those experiences by riding the surfboards. People have those kind of experiences racing their cars,
right,
going
so
to,
that's
right. So thrill seeking Yeah,
Right.
it's a common experience. It's nothing special about it.
So how do
Everything is
you,
ordinary.
but it can be very distracting, I guess is the word that I'm looking for. So how do you deal with those experiences in meditation? So firstly, that's not a jhana, correct?
Thought distracting is a hindrance.
Right.
Thoughts of it being a distraction is a hindrance. So even though you're feeling pity, that's not first jhana. It's just one of the constituent components. That
Right.
in fact, that that it is a hindrance means that now the mind is in an unwholesome state,
Hmm.
even though there is still pity there.
Hmm. I see.
So piti is not the key ingredient. There are no key ingredients. You have to have all five. It's almost like this. Imagine that you're going to bake a cake
Yeah.
and you've got all the ingredients for making the cake, including the bowl and the mixers and the eggs and the milk and the sugar and the flour. And all of a sudden you realize you've got no flour. You're missing an ingredient or you're missing the sugar. If
Mhm.
you go ahead and make that cake without one of those ingredients, then it's not going to be cake. Whatever it is, it might be a falafel,
Yeah.
it, it might be a souffle, but it's not going to be a cake if it
Yeah.
doesn't have all the ingredients that cakes require.
Fair enough.
That's the that's what we have to understand, that it's a collection, it's a samadhi, it's a putting together of things, not that one is something more important than the others.
Right. That was very helpful. Thank you so much for that. So I just had a few questions about dependent origination, if I may. So dependent origination kind of begins with the condition of ignorance. Um,
Actually, you're going through a formal method. It would act this one also would take quite a long time to answer it. And I'll tell you, I'll give you part of the reason for that. And let me describe it this way. If you take the actual teachings that I'm giving you and put them together in an understanding, then you can take what you already know and begin to plug it in. But almost no one does that correctly. What they do instead is they take every little individual thing that I say and try to plug it into what they already know. That's going to make it very, very long and slow because you're using a basis as what you already know. And I would like for you to throw that out for a little while and take on the basis of actually how to get started practice so that you get the real basics down because you're missing them. You're not ready for paticcasamuppāda.
Fair
What,
enough.
okay, that you need to get the mind fit for work. And
Right.
when the mind is fit for work, then you can work with paticcasamuppāda. Now, some of paticcasamuppāda is rupa and some of it is arupa,
Mhm.
which means that there's a certain time in our practice that the first jhana is rupa. When we get the mind up to the fourth jhana, that's arupa, which means that now we can use that state of arupa, not physical, so that we can see what's totally mental, which is the actual issues of paticcasamuppāda, is that some of it is physical and some of it is mental. Let's work with the physical parts while we're still physical. Okay,
Right.
so first jhana is physical. What I mean by that is that the hindrances are real. Sukha is real. Why do I say that? Is because it has certain body chemistries inside the mind.
Mhm.
Okay, it has certain body chemistry in the body. If you feel good, there's going to be a different body chemistry than if you're feeling agitated, uptight, or angry.
Right.
Then you're going to have different body chemistries. So this is all quite real. When people are experiencing piti, it's clearly real. An example of that would be a touchdown made at a football game. Let us say it's the star end of the year World Cup or Rose Bowl or something like that. And the quarterback makes the touchdown. What does he do immediately after he makes the touchdown?
Celebrate.
He celebrates. That's what piti is. It's celebrating. and it has physical manifestations to it.
Yes.
Okay. So this is why we're going back to very basics. Let's stay with the basics until we get the basics down. I was like that with music, that I didn't like playing the pieces that the teacher gave me. I wanted to play the pieces of music that I could hear on the recordings.
Mm-hmm.
But I couldn't play that music on the recordings.
Yeah.
I wasn't ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was frustrating myself. Instead of actually becoming good at what I could do, I was very bad at something that I couldn't do, but I wanted to do it. Okay, so let's go back to the basics of Ānāpānasati and get those down so that we can have a base to build on. And how we do that is going back even more basic, back to the Four Noble Truths, and back to in fact, the entire teachings of the Buddha can be stated in just one little phrase. He says, both formally and now, I teach only one thing. The Buddha only teaches one thing. What does he teach? Dukkha, dukkha-nirodha. Seeing our dissatisfaction and coming out of dissatisfaction. There's no magic in there anywhere. The Buddha has no magical teachings at all. The Buddha did not teach magical powers. He did not teach rebirth and reincarnation. He did not teach other worlds. He taught suffering and the end of suffering. That in fact, people who want other worlds, who want reincarnation, who want magical powers, are all being dissatisfied because they don't have what they want. And nobody gets any of that stuff because it's arupa. It's not in the real world. There are no magical powers. I've gone through India and I've seen quite a lot of stuff. One of the things that I remember seeing was a guy that had two pieces of flat plate steel. Welded together between them was a pole, and he would go and bury one of those pieces of steel, having the pole come up and having a chair for the other one. He would then sit on this and drape a little cloth over the pole that he had so that it looked like that he was floating in the air about 1.5 feet off the ground. So I stationed myself at a restaurant where I could see him and waited for him to get up, and he did, and he picked his chair up and he walked away when nobody was looking. These are the magical powers. They're almost always magical tricks. You've heard of the rope trick. You know what a rope trick is what they do is they take an old piece of wiring, some cable that's coming, mostly copper, sometimes it's aluminum, and they unwrap the rope, put this piece of copper pipe or this copper rod in it, wrap the rope back in it, and then coil the rope down. And then the guy sits in front of this coil of rope while another one is magically touching it here and there, and soon the rope begins to rise. Well, he's actually forming the copper inside the rope so that it becomes straight, and the rope just goes up in the air. It's all just magic show, right? But people want that kind of thing, and when they want it to be real, they never get a real rope to do that. But you're enough of a scientist to know about flexibility and gravity and weight and all of that to recognize that, yeah, it's going to take the stiffness of a copper tube or a copper wire to hold that rope up, because the rope's not going to do it by itself. So this is why we need to deal with reality. We need to deal with what's real, because that's where we're going to find our salvation from our suffering. So the teaching of the Buddha is dukkha, dukkha-nirodha, coming out of our mental suffering, and almost all of our mental suffering is caused because we want something to be real that's not real. If we're satisfied with what is real, now we've got something going. To be satisfied with what we've got, to be satisfied with what's real. This is the basic teaching of the Buddha. The question is, how can we come out of that state of being the first noble truth, of being in a state of being dissatisfied, into the third noble truth, we're in a state of being satisfied, as I understand, number one, how we got there, the second noble truth, and number two, what we can do to get out of that state right now, to the Eightfold Noble Path, which has sati, to look at what we're doing, to remember to look at what we're doing and then make a change, to throw that unwholesome hindrance out of the mind and put a wholesome thought in the mind over and over again until we begin to feel really good. This is the basic practice of the Buddha. No magic anywhere necessary. It's a real practice. But this practice will take us out of the world of desire. And so we become, in the Pali, the word is lokatara, we become above this location. We become above our environment. We become above the rules. We become above our own desires so that we are able to live in the world of ordinary people, but we don't get it rubbed off on us. We don't become worldly again simply because we're in the world. Just like a swimmer can swim in the water, but he does not become water. So he could be in the world or in the water, but not of the water. He's not the water. So when we were raised as children, because of our own ignorance, we joined the world. Very, very rarely would be a baby that was born that could see with wisdom the reality of the stupidity of the things that his parents are telling him. None of us. We're all born in that ignorant state. And then we're raised in that ignorant state so that everything that we collect, everything that we remember, every childhood rule that we've learned, that we grow up with, we learn that in ignorance. This is why ignorance starts at the foundation. So everything that we learn, all of that stuff that's put together, all of those sankharas are learned ignorantly. Now it's time to unravel that stuff. Instead of having unwholesome things that we remember through ignorance, we begin now to put wholesome things into our sankhara so that we change the balance. And sometime in the future, eventually, you've had so many wholesome thoughts recently and so rarely unwholesome thoughts that the new wholesome thoughts begin to outweigh the old unwholesome thoughts. And so now you naturally begin to have wholesome thoughts. But we all start out with unwholesome thoughts because everything is a survival issue when you're a very young baby. But now that you're an adult, very few things are an actual survival issue. The only survival issue you have right now is your next breath.
That's right.
Everything else is safe right now. And so if we can see that safety and recognize that we are getting the breath that we need and that we can be grateful for that breath. Oh, I'm so glad I can have one more breath, one more easy breath. Wow, how nice this breath is, keeping us alive. And so we have begun to have wholesome thoughts like that. And as our wholesome thoughts grow and expand, then those wholesome thoughts will be what we use with our perception in order to understand and make sense out of reality. So, in fact, I am beginning to teach paticcasamuppāda. So, let's go back to the fact that the Buddha actually teaches only one thing. And so when we see the 5 of this and 4 of that and 8 of those and 16 of them things and 12 of this and 9 of those and all of that, 5 more of that and 4 more of those things and 3 of them, all of those numbers are mere mnemonics to look at the various components. But when everything comes back together, the teachings of the Buddha is just one thing, and that is dukkha-nirodha. That's all that is being taught. But it looks very complicated to the beginner because there's all of this, that, and the other thing, to where in fact it's really, really very simple. The Four Noble Truths is actually nothing but the Eightfold Noble Path to get yourself into a state of satisfaction. And that's very easy to do with the Eightfold Noble Path when we apply it to Ānāpānasati. So we wake up, we see what's in the mind, we gladden the mind, and we do that over and over and over again. Wake up, see what's in the mind, and gladden the mind. That waking up is sati. The seeing what's going on is the ditti, the samadhi, right viewing. And then the next one is to make a course correction, to make a change, to change the mind from an unwholesome thought to a wholesome thought. These 3 items on the Eightfold Noble Path is exactly how we practice Ānāpānasati. And as we sit there, we relax because we tell ourselves it's okay to relax. And so we relax and we take deep breath and we begin to feel good right here in this very moment. And as we do that, then we begin to get joyous and happy. And as that joy grows, it grows into the piti with the attitude of, I've got this. Wow, this feels really good. And that would be the first jhana. It's not magical. People who want the first jhana and don't have the first jhana, for them it's magical. And so they can paint any kind of picture on that magical idea that they have. But the first jhana is actually a real ordinary state that everybody goes in and out of every day. The question is, can you see this stuff correctly and clearly? And then work, to see things the way that they really are and be satisfied with that and not be wanting to have things that we don't have. And so this is the correct way of practicing, and it's better to do this in seclusion because the world will keep us in hindrances. We'll think of
That's right.
work to do and all of that. So we need to get away into seclusion and just practice on looking at what we have in the mind and not allowing the mind to do anything other than having happy, wholesome thoughts about what's happening right now. Nothing in the past, not last week, not last month, not last lifetime, not in the forward, not in the future, not tomorrow, not next week, not next lifetime, just what's happening right here, right now. Do I feel good? Am I talking myself into feeling good? And so this is the practice of feeling good. The question of that is, how good do you feel? The answer to that is good enough. Because if you feel good, but it's not enough, then you're still dissatisfied.
Right.
So you can feel this good and be dissatisfied. You can feel this good and be dissatisfied. And you can feel that good and be dissatisfied. So how good you feel is not the real issue. The real issue is are you satisfied with how you feel? This is the sukha, the satisfaction, as opposed to the dukkha, which is being dissatisfied. And so here you've called me being dissatisfied because you don't know this, that, and the other. And now you're recognizing that you can, in fact, be satisfied even though you don't know this, that, and the other, because it's not really relevant. So this is how we begin to practice. And I would recommend, rather than the normal way that Westerners practice is sitting for long periods of time, it's better to practice quite often, 4 to 6 times a day for a short period of time, like 10 to 15 minutes. If
Right.
you practice like that, then you've got a fresh, bright mind that you can work with and bring that mind into a happy state. But if you've been sitting there on the floor for 30 or 40 minutes, and the mind is dull and the breathing is not good, then we're wasting our time sitting there on the floor. We're thinking that we're getting some value because we're at least racking up the hours as if some karma machine is keeping track. But karma machines don't have clocks. And so there's no reason to practice for long periods of time if we're not practicing correctly. Then, in fact, if we're practicing but not practicing correctly, then we're not just wasting our time, we're just reinforcing old bad habits. So it's better to practice short periods of time and practice over and over and over again to get the mind back into a really good, happy, wholesome state.
Mm-hmm.
To relax the body, to relax the feelings, to relax the mind, and just be gentle on yourself. Now, there's a whole lot more to say about this, but this is a basic introduction, just to get started.
Well, thank you so much, Dhammarato. I really appreciate you taking the time to tell me all of this, and I will continue with my practice, which in recent times has been less successful than it used to be. but I will continue, and hopefully I will make progress over time.
Okay, well, I'm hoping that whatever you've been practicing, you start making some changes to it so that you don't want so much, that you can
Right.
practice in this present moment. I've got everything I need. I can breathe. That's all I need right now, and I'm happy with what I've got. So this is the new emphasis on practice. This is what we would say is going to be the practice.
Mhm.
In that regard, we can make the distinction between meditation, which I don't teach, but I used Ānāpānasati to teach the Dhamma.
Right.
So if you're willing to go in that direction, then I'm quite willing to have you as a student.
That would be great. It's just that I also do have work obligations and family obligations, so subject to
Well, I
those.
only asked for 5 or 10 minutes, and here you are saying that you've got to quit family and work obligations. I don't think so.
I would love to practice. I would love to practice.
Yeah, it doesn't take even an hour a day. You can do even less than an hour a day. One time you can do it as early in the morning when you first wake up.
Right.
Get yourself ready for the day by saying, hey, I can take care of this day. This is going to be a marvelous day, and I can handle everything just right. We don't have to think about what we're doing. We can think about feeling good for a while. And then when you lay down at night, instead of thinking about going to sleep or thinking about all the stuff you've got to do tomorrow, you can just think about how nice it is to lay in bed and breathe. And here is so snuggly warm, and everything is so cool, and everything is so nice. And get your mind into that frame of reference, and then you'll have sweet dreams because you're having sweet thoughts. But if you have thoughts about how much busy you've got to be tomorrow, then you're going to be busy in your dreams. So these are 2 times to practice, once in the morning and once in the night. And then you can plug in a couple of other times during the day for 5 or 10 minutes at break or at lunch or when you're driving or anything you can do. That this is not requiring that you sit on the floor in a particular building with a particular Buddha Rupa and statuary, or maybe a monk and candles and incense, the whole 9 yards of it. Sometimes we have beads and bells, and none of that stuff is important. What's important is to clear the unwholesome thoughts out of the mind and get yourself into a state of rest. So easy, nothing to it. You don't need any of the paraphernalia. You don't need anything other than a happy mind. And we can get that easy enough by taking a few deep breaths. So what I would recommend is the students call in the beginning once or twice a week. So give it a few days, get yourself into a really good state, and then call me. Or if you don't get yourself into a good state, then for sure call me.
Right.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll see you later. When are you going to call?
So let's say the middle of the week, maybe Thursday.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Depending on if I've made any progress by then.
Yeah, no, actually, what I'm saying is it doesn't matter what progress that you've made. Whatever you're doing, we can talk about it.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. And your name is Karthik.
Yes, close enough.
Haven't heard that name ever before.
Well, it's a Hindu name.
I know, I can tell. That's clearly obvious. But I'm not sure which language it is in. I'm more familiar with both Gujarati and Hindi, but that doesn't look like that's probably what, Tamil? No, that's not Tamil.
I am not too sure, honestly, so I don't want to say something that's not correct. So.
Okay. All right. Well, if you don't care, neither do I. That's not relevant. All right. Well, we'll see you again.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Much appreciated.
Bye-bye.